Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Brass Junkies. I am your host, Andrew Hitz, and I am joined by my co-host, Lance LaDuke. Lance, how are you?
Fair to Midland. Thank you for asking.
We are recording this the morning after the Oscars, and my co-host here was not aware of what had happened, and I started to tell him, and I got one word in. I said, "What?" And I was like, "Hold on," and then I queued it up, the unedited version, and then I shared it with him, and then I was because of the Zoom delay, I was able to watch and then watch my co-host and go. So yeah.
So
anyway,
what went out on the air?
Well, they
There's a delay, right?
They bleeped out. It was a slap, not a punch. But yes, they showed it. So yeah, that was something. Yep. The Japanese translation is pretty funny. That's like the unedited where they're which I played for you. Anyway, moving right along. This session from Dr. Beth Wiese from the Tuba Workshop was just phenomenal.
Really good.
Yeah.
I don't think I knew Beth beforehand. It was fun talking to her, and that's a cool brain.
Yeah, exactly cool, incredible artist. She's a wonderful player. If anyone hasn't heard her, she's got some videos up of like some Bach cello suites. Like, you know what the world doesn't really need is more tuba players playing the Bach cello suites necessarily. Guess what? The world needs people playing them like she does. Like, I mean, it's really good. Really cool. Yeah, it's excellent. So, speaking of excellence, did you know that Parker Mouthpieces provides the hosting for the Brass Junkies? Parker Mouthpieces offers fine, customizable component mouthpieces for horn, trombone, euphonium, and tuba, including the Andrew Hitz Artist Model Tuba mouthpiece and the Lance LaDuke Model Euphonium mouthpiece. Did you even know that? You weren't even aware.
Oh wait, what? Oh, that explains this.
Yes,
well, that's weird.
You thought they put you thought they put your name on it, no matter who you were.
Yeah,
just get a Bob Smith one. There you go.
Yep.
You can find out more at parkermouthpieces.com or follow them on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
You know what, Andrew?
What, Lance?
The Mary Papert School of Music at Duquesne University is a fine institution, and you should find out more about it by clicking in the show notes.
I should.
Because you'll go and you'll find out all of the amazing people who are teaching there, the ensembles you can play with, and you can find out that Pittsburgh's a pretty cool town.
If I ever decide to
start, anybody to know that, because then more people will come here. It's actually it's a terrible town. Don't come to Pittsburgh.
If I ever start a third master's degree, no, sorry, not a third. If I ever attempt to get a master's degree for a third time, it made it sound like I've already got 2 and I might get a third. No, I've got 0. I would strongly consider Duquesne.
There you go. You should. Like I said, an amazing array of folks you can study with, regardless of your instrument. And yeah, thank you very much for being longtime sponsors, and very special thanks and a warm, heartfelt thank you to Jim, Slap the Taste Right Out of Your Mouth Nova, for making that possible.
No? What about Houchin Horns, Lance?
What about Houchin Horns? You know, Houchin Horns aims to spread the joy of music through providing the highest level of product, services, and resources to the brass playing community. I'm jumping to. Houchin Horns stocks the finest makes of brass instruments, including Bach, Conselmer, Eastman, Shires, Engelbert, Schmidt, Paxman, Tyne, and Yamaha, among many others. Now I'm going to back up. 15-day money-back guarantee with free shipping on all new instruments and accessories, with multiple easy financing options on all inventory. Terms and conditions apply. Now I'm jumping, just like freestyling. You ready? Repairs and customizations, in-house backup tube, mouthpieces by Greg Black-Lasky, Pickett, Schilke, and more. Fast Forward 4. Free equipment consultations, in person or virtual, are available with our team of professional musicians. Schedule yours at houchinhorns.com. Second to last one, watch over 200 unique videos on Houchin Horns' YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Houchin Horns. And then if you enter the promo code Junkies, which apparently you have to use that voice every time you do that, at online checkout, you receive 10% off your purchase from houchinhorns.com. Some limitations apply.
That was like Junkies.
I'm going to have to take a knee.
Yeah. All right. So this session with Beth was awesome. We knew that we wanted to turn this into an episode because everybody needs to hear this. If you want to, the entire workshop is available through the Hitz Academy library. You can go to pedalnotemedia.com/Tuba Tuba-Workshop, but we wanted to include this one for free because it's so good. She talks about like curiosity and about encouraging curiosity, and about how creating begins with curiosity, and then about how curiosity leads to creation, which leads to productivity. Really, really good stuff. Like I left this one. This was one of those. She's really good at talking about like big issues, and yet I leave it feeling like I know what actions to take afterwards. Whereas sometimes the philosophical stuff can be like cool, and then like the next day I'm like, okay, great. So now what am I supposed to do? And this one, I thought gave me, a direct kick in the butt, which was
action
appreciated.
items.
Yeah, exactly.
I have a question. Does the Hitz Academy require uniforms?
Like, it should.
Yeah, we should have beanies.
It should.
Short pants.
Yeah,
Tall socks.
I'll wear, if anybody's a graphic designer and wants to do a mock-up of some Hitz Academy.
Does that make
uniforms.
you the headmaster then?
I think so.
There you go.
Yep.
So you get to enforce all the rules.
Is
there a curfew?
I was such a rule follower when I was in school that it would make sense that I would be the one enforcing the rules now.
It would make sense, yeah. And then there definitely should be a Hitz Academy alma mater song.
If someone wants to write one, we'll consider it. Yeah. In fact, submit it. We'll figure it out. That sounds good.
There you go.
Before this devolves any further, without further ado, let us get to the conversation that we had with tuba player extraordinaire, Dr. Beth Wiese.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to see more content by the Brass Junkies, just click on the like and subscribe button. You'll have an opportunity to see some of the greatest brass players in the world, and Andrew and me.
Okay, welcome to our second session. The first one was with Patrick Sheridan, who did a fantastic deep dive into practicing and into anatomy and into some breathing exercises. It was wonderful as always. Boy, he is always changing his teaching. It's unreal. Like, if you see him do a session, like the same session a week later, he's refined it a little bit. It's like, and it just keeps getting better. He's just always moving forward, which is awesome.
You just can't remember what he did the previous time.
There is. I was being nice, Lance, but you're apparently not in the mood. So we are joined now by Dr. Beth Wiese, who is one of my favorite tuba soloists out there right now. When I see her, posting videos and it's just like, it's just music. It's just music. There's just music that happens to be coming out of a tuba, and she happens to operate the crap out of a tuba at a really, really high level, but that's not the headline when I listen to her play. It's the artistry, and then she just uses all of that, not talent, but skill, all that hard work to be able to, to make what she's hearing in her head come out of her bell. So it is wonderful. By the end of this hour, she's going to enable all of us to do that at the exact same level that she can. No pressure. Thanks for joining us, Beth.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I don't know what to say to that other than thanks for letting me chat with you, and I'm glad I don't have to do any of that live. It's really nice.
Actually, this is awkward because I told all the participants that they could just throw in the Q&A like any standard tuba rep, right? And that you could just play it without any warning. So what could possibly
on demand, right? Yeah, I take requests as long as it's about one of 5 pieces that I've been practicing lately. We're good.
Yeah, I take requests too, as long as it's at a specific place, time, date, and that I pre-approved what I'm going to play.
Exactly.
So, can you give us the short version of who you are? Tell us where you teach, and then we'll start to unpack some stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I've been all over the place, but at present I teach at Appalachian State University. It's called Appalachian, and it is in Boone, North Carolina. We're up in the mountains of Western North Carolina. I've been there this is my 7th year. Before that, I was, like I said, I was kind of all over the place. In a real vague nutshell, I started life as a violinist, and then decided that was way too hard. Switched to the tuba, and life's been good ever since. So anyways, I went to school in Wisconsin, this tiny little school in Wisconsin. Most people know it as that school next to Green Bay, Lawrence University. I studied with Marty Erickson, who is the godfather of basically every tuba player out there.
He's decent.
Yeah, he knows what he's talking about. And he can talk too.
I didn't say that. I just said he was decent, but anyway.
I did a degree with him, and then I decided that wasn't enough tuba in my life, so I went and did a master's at Yale with Mike Roylance and got a lot of tuba there, and still not enough. So I went to Northwestern and I did my doctoral degree with Rex Martin, and that was enough. No, I'm just kidding. Couldn't go any further than that. So then I went to the New World Symphony and tried my hand at orchestral tuba playing and decided I wanted a more diverse career. So I ended up in college teaching, and that's where I am today. Yeah, that's it. It's 30 some years in a nutshell.
I like that Marty was like, you're like, I want more. You're like, Mike, you're like, I want more. Rex, you're like, I am good. I'm good. No thanks.
Well, I mean, to be fair, you can't go any further, but
yeah,
there's a compliment in there somewhere to Professor Martin.
We're not good on the to be fair part.
To be fair does not make for good radio.
How did you end up at Lawrence?
My high school tuba teacher ended up becoming the director of bands there the same year I started college there. And he was interviewing for the job and was like, have you heard of this school called Lawrence University? And I was like, no, I have not. And so I went up there and I auditioned, and totally by chance, Marty Erickson happened to teach there. And yeah, just kind of clicked. It was just this little, just one-off school, and it was great. Everyone knows Marty. I feel like everyone has a Marty Erickson story, right? And and he was really the person that just like turned me on to like so much of the tuba. You know, like Lance, I was talking about listening to your recordings, and Andrew, I listened to yours too and stuff, because like Marty like has every tuba CD ever known to man. I promise you that is the truth. And that really was like 90% of
He didn't have a CD player, but
no, this is back when people had CD players.
Not to spend too much time on Lawrence specifically, but Lawrence University is one of a handful of schools that I think are uniquely equipping musicians to have successful careers.
I totally agree.
Carefully worded statement that I stand behind each of those words. Can you talk a bit about what that experience was like? So Matthew Arau, is that your band director? Is that who you were talking about?
His name was Andy Mast, and he's the director of bands there. And I think Matthew Arau came maybe like I graduated a while back. He came a few years after I graduated. But I think Lawrence is really interesting. It's a great experience for anybody, because I think they think of the musician as like a human first, a human, a musician, and then a tuba player. And I think that's a really important sequential order. And I think they look at that through a really like holistic lens. And so they have a lot of different experiences from it's a liberal arts school with a music conservatory. So you take liberal arts classes and you take all these classes where you just, talk about the world or whatever, expunge for hours on end, and it's great. But then also they have a lot of musical programs that I think try to be very forward thinking. They just instituted this, I forget what it was called. It's called like a bachelor. It's basically a Bachelor of Arts, but for people who come in like not reading music, like for people who have a totally different background than probably all of us here in this room, and still want a degree in music. And I think that's a really, really cool thing that I commend them for.
Yeah, one of the byproducts of everyone having a computer in their pocket is that you can create music without needing to know what a G sharp is.
Shocking,
you know
right?
what I mean? Like, so what do you do with? And now we're seeing the same at Carnegie Mellon, where there's a generation of students that are exceptional artists and probably are more artistic than they're better at creating than recreating. Instead of taking a piece of repertoire and playing it at a very high level, they create stuff. And the schools of music are having to figure out what to do with these incredible musicians that just don't happen to know how to do the stuff that you did if you came up, starting on the violin and switching to the tuba.
Yeah, no, I don't know about you, Lance, but I feel like, and Andrew, I think you've taught a little bit in higher ed. You've taught quite a bit in higher ed too. But like, I feel like we're at a stage, particularly right now with all that's going on, sort of outside of music as well, that I feel like I'm totally relearning how to think about music and how to teach, particularly how to program. Like I have students coming in with pieces and stuff like that I've never experienced before. And it's really a learning experience for me as much as it is for them.
Yeah. So then how do you get that seed to grow in your own studio?
What do you mean by that?
How do you encourage that sort of behavior and that sort of musician? How do you keep that ball rolling? If you think that there's value to that approach, and it sounds like you do, then what do you do in your own like day-to-day work with your students to encourage them to stretch in the ways that you're talking about being stretched?
Well, I think that's the common thread that I can find with them and with me, which is listening, right? I think I got to be honest, like they're listening to stuff that we just went to the Southeast Regional Tuba Euphonium Conference as a studio. And so it means like 10 or 11 hours in a van with 16 of my students, right? And we spent a lot of time going through what they listened to. And it was so fascinating because some of it was good and some of it some of it was something. But it's, I think the common thread is you have to encourage curiosity. Like I listened to different stuff when I was their age and when I was younger, real different stuff. And that's part of, it's just my background of who I am, like how I grew up as a violinist and a couple of parents who are really into classical music. But I think all of this creating, as you put it, begins with curiosity. Like I think of the linear projection is like curiosity, which then leads to creativity, which then leads to productivity. That's kind of the line that I see. So that's my thought.
Well, that's pretty cool. So then when you get to the productivity part, are there specific strategies or exercises that you use to encourage your students to take the stuff that they're listening to that maybe you don't dig or that we wouldn't dig, but that could inform them? So is there how do you get from there to there, I guess is the... Yeah,
I think that's a really good question. I think what I do as a teacher is I give them some of the more practical tools that they need while also trying to encourage their own curiosity. And hopefully those two things merge, and in an ideal circumstance, I have particularly some of my older undergraduate students, like the juniors and seniors, who will come to me and be like, I totally see the importance of fundamentals, but I'm getting really into jazz, and let's go do the Jamie Aebersold stuff. And how can I mix, these fundamental concepts that we've been working on with, the Jamie Aebersold, volume, I think we're on 24 or something like that. But, and so I think what I can do as a teacher is give them the structure, at least in the beginning, of like, I think you need certain parameters, right? Because y'all are super creative, and I would probably say way more creative than I am. But like, you need certain parameters when you create, right? Otherwise, you tend to just be
guardrails. Guardrails
exactly.
Can actually lead to more creativity in my experience.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing. When I was like really little, I used to want to be like a great pianist, right? And I would watch these amazing pianists, and I'd be like, oh, I can do what they're doing, just smack on a piano for a while, right? And then I would do that, and I'd be like, well, that does not sound like, Van Cliburn or something. And it sounds like trash. And
Van Halen.
Not Van Halen on a bad day even, And so from that, I was like, okay, you need rules. You need some element of discipline to get there, And so I think that's what a good teacher can provide, in addition to encouraging that sort of creativity, that sort of, okay, you go explore on your own, but also here's what you need to accomplish on a week-to-week basis. Like without that accountability, I think we would all just be like lost in our own, thoughts without ever being able to be productive.
That's interesting. I was lost in my thoughts there for a second, but it occurs to me that I do a thing that I did because I had students who were like, I hate Roshu. I don't want to play Roshu. I was like, no sweat. You got to go find me a substitute for Roshu that does what Roshu does. And then you find out how much they really hate it.
Yeah, because then
like,
they come back with
never
Roshu. Yeah,
Or-
exactly.
But I had one student who decided to go through the slow melodies and Arvins, which is cool because it gives you the same sort of like phrasing and that kind of thing, shorter. But and then they're going to graduate out of that pretty quickly too. But another student brought in Irish airs and Celtic airs, and I was like, now we're doing something. Like this is cool and weird and different. And that stuff is just songbooks. So there's no it's written for just people to sing to or play, fiddle to or whatever. So they have to figure out where do you breathe in this? How do you phrase this? There's no articulations. It's not written for brass people. So a lot of times, they feel like from my experience, they feel like they pulled one over on me. And I'm like, you showed me. Like, how do you want to phrase that? Like, at least in Roshu, there's at least a starting dynamic. There's at least some ideas about phrasing or slurs and articulation and stuff. And so like, okay, cool. What do you think now? Dang it.
If it makes you feel any better, it's really not that hard to pull one over on you. So they probably aren't bragging to themselves that much.
I don't get it.
So Beth, how do you foster creativity in your own practicing? At this point in your life, you have certain things that you have to do, like say a faculty recital, and you don't get to just decide that you're going to prepare that for a month and a half after the date. There are certain hoops that you have to jump through, right? How do you make sure that you stay curious?
It's a good question. How do I make sure that I stay curious? I think so much of it is how you approach things. Like I can totally resonate with what Lance is saying. I have plenty of students who come in and are like, I hated this week's Roshu. It was horrible. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, well, first of all, I will validate your sentiment, whatever. But also, like, did you consider that, like, the way you approached it has largely something to do with the fact that you generally disliked practicing this week, I think that's something that's within our control. Like so much of our life, we don't get to choose what we play all the time. We don't get to choose what somebody's going to pay us to perform, but we do get to choose how we approach it. And I think that's a really valuable lesson because so many times, I don't love every piece that I play, but there's an approach that you can find enjoyment with, like the Roshu, I remember one time, this is something that Professor Martin told me. He was like, if you ever have students who, gosh, I hope he never listens to this. He was like, if you ever have students who you can't figure out phrasing, he was like, make them write words to a Roshu, right? And so I did this, and I'm a largely uncreative person when it comes to lyrics, right? So like this was my first year of teaching, right? And I was like, all right, let's write your grocery shopping list to this Roshu. And we did it. And it was terrible, right? But it was fascinating because then all of a sudden you're singing about broccoli and peas and like carrots and who gives a crap, But it changes the approach, which changes the way you feel about a piece, right? Yeah. And I think that was an important lesson, which is like you're in control of how you approach something. You're not always in control of what you have to do, but you are in control of how you look at something. So when I'm doing my own practicing, I find that interesting. Like, I think the most interesting thing about us as musicians is like the tuba is largely a window into your mind. It's very much, it shows you how you're thinking, what you're thinking about, how that affects the outcome of what comes out of that giant bell. And I think that's fascinating. So when I start thinking about that, for me, that's what gets me excited. I'm like, yeah, this is fun. But when I'm practicing, I'm really trying to focus on, okay, what am I putting into this instrument? And what do I want to come out of the instrument? And do those things match up? If they do, then I don't need to practice anymore and let's go home. But if I don't, then it's something really, really interesting. So my practicing is largely a mental exercise, particularly at this point. I've been playing the tuba now officially longer than any of my students has been alive. It's awesome. But I realize how much of a mental game it is, and how fascinating that is from a perspective of the operator, which is what we are. We are the operator of this heavy machinery.
Right. Would you say there is a either what are the major actual technical obstacles for a performer, a tuba player, they have an idea, and then sometimes it gets lost in translation. By the time it hits the mouthpiece and the valves, something is lost when you're listening to it. Do you have any sense of sort of common themes? Or is it, well, I don't want to lead
director. I like the way you put that, because I think my thoughts really align really closely with you here, which is that music is a 3-step process for me. It starts with an idea, which is translated into an action, and that equals a response, right? So as a teacher and as a performer, I'm okay, we can problem solve either at step 1 or step 2 and assess at step 3. Really simple. There's only 3 steps in this whole process, right? So for me, I think since we are, musicians above tuba players, I like to start with that idea. Refine the idea first. Can you sing it? Do you really actually know what you want to go into your instrument? And for me, a lot of times I'm very humbled when I sing something, because I'm oh boy, that's not right. It's when you actually start with that idea and try to nuance that, then I'm okay, I see that step 1 is generally flawed. So then let's say I'm comfortable singing it, and then I go to the action part, and that's a physical thing, a physical response, a physical action. For me, it's very much, I love to buzz. And one of the things that I think Professor Martin taught me probably better than anybody else, which is that if you buzz with a good sound, you're going to play with a good sound. And the man, I can still hear his buzzing in my head to this day.
Yeah.
That sound, right? And it seems like such an obvious concept, which is oh, you buzz with a good sound, you play with a good sound. But the question is then what is a good sound to buzz with? And this is a really, really nuanced answer. There's all sorts of physical mechanisms that you could go into. And one of the things that I admire most about Professor Martin's teaching is that he never really went into them, but we still learned what a good sound was on the mouthpiece. I think that's the mark of a really great teacher who taught me to just really internalize what a great sound was on the mouthpiece without thinking about where are my teeth, where is, this and this. And he addressed that kind of stuff, but he taught it from a musical perspective. And so when we go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I feel like, I was going to say students, but it's all of us. We have the roadmap either in our head or on the stand in front of us, and the amplifier is right next to our head. So we know exactly what we're doing, and we know exactly what that, ideally, we know what we're intending to do with a crescendo or a rallentando or some sort of emotive thing. And I think that's that third part. Just because I know that the roadmap is here and the amp is in my ear doesn't mean that 10 feet away or 20 feet away that anybody will get the message that I'm trying to send to them. So it's you have to be implicit and exaggerate what your messaging is if you hope people will understand it, I think.
Really true. And I think that's something too that I get a lot of feedback from recording myself. Definitely. I also get a lot of feedback from singing through something, because then I really hear is this the product that I want, right? And if I can sing it and it's a product that I want, and then I play it and I record it and it's not the product that I want, then I say, okay, then I need to refine here. Step 2, there's something in the action that I want to refine.
That's
right?
really specific data.
Yeah, I think it's well, for me, I'm a simple person. I can't think in complex ways. So in terms of do I problem solve here, and how does that affect there? It's easy, right? And so when you boil it all down to 3 steps, then it's just okay, the issue can only be one of 2 places. Now, the nuancing, the question of, what do you want to sound like and how do you do that? it's complicated and there's a lot of different variables, but it helps to at least compartmentalize. Are we talking about, Professor Martin always used to call it like the artist or the artisan? You know, I don't know if he ever talked to you about that too. He was big into that, or at least it's something I took.
Andrew never really reached that kind of.
I didn't pay attention in lessons either.
You just never needed this whole spiel. I'm sure you were above all of that, right?
I was so advanced.
one interpretation.
I'm glad you said that. It would have sounded obnoxious for me to have. So I appreciate that very much.
That's not fair. It sounded obnoxious when she said it.
Can you? I'm strongly guessing that was a concept that he put into words after I studied with him, since I studied with him a while before you did. Can you talk a little bit about artist versus artisan?
Yeah. So you know, he would always talk. He would often talk about there being sort of two sides of our brain, two responsibilities that we had as a musician. The first was being as an artist, you know, dealing with, let's say, the communicative, the expressive side of what we do. And the second was being an artisan, which I'm amazed, by the way, how many of my students don't know what an artisan is anymore. This is a term that's really kind of fallen far out of fashion, you know, especially now that we can machine everything and import it from China. But this idea of artisanship is sort of, to me, encompasses the technical aspects of what we're doing, but it really is elevated to a level of craftsmanship. You know, in the same way, like one of my favorite documentaries is this documentary, Jiro Dreams of Sushi. You guys know this one, right? You watch a guy make rice for like an hour and a half and it's riveting, right? And I think he really shows you that a great artisan is someone who takes a skill and elevates it to a level of deep and profound meaning that can be extrapolated far beyond, you know, the grains of a rice and the cut of a sushi, you know, of a fish, sorry. So anyways, he would always talk about, you know, approaching things both as an artist and an artisan, you know, but the ultimate question comes down to like, what do you want people to hear between these two facets of your brain? And of course we want to hear the artistry. You know, I think for me, the best performances that I've heard on any instrument are ones where it doesn't even occur to me like what instrument they're playing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where you're just like, this is music. You know? And so to do that, obviously it requires a level of artisanship to get to that level. And so that's part of the reason why I think, and I still do to this day, fundamentals to such a religious level. I mean, it's a part of my day every day. And I think those are the skills that allow you to communicate in the most meaningful way. So.
You have a unique perspective in having studied with three experts in the field who I hope they're not listening because I'm going to say nice things about them, but then I'm going to be slightly reductive. So Marty, here's one way to look at their three careers. You look at Marty, and in my mind, and knowing him as long as I've known him, like the notion of jazz is like screaming, like he's just an expert jazz performer on the tuba. Then you look at Mike, and he's got, you know, he's like the kind of quintessential orchestral player. And Rex, to me, is maybe not first and foremost, and not in the way that like Pat is or others are, but it's a soloist mentality. Definitely not the only thing that he does, and this is intentionally reductive. But so you've had this perspective from three different vantage points of teacher. What can you talk about? What the commonalities were, or the differences were, or if any of those things even resonate? That might not even be anything.
Yeah, no. I think that's great, and I love talking about my teachers because they're the best. But I remember I was asked a question kind of similarly. I'm going to be reductive to you now too. Kind of similar to what you said, which was like, I can't remember, it was a job interview. It was like, what basically could you boil down what you learned most from each teacher, right? And I think I was really lucky to have three very different teachers. Like they, on paper at least, and personality wise, they are pretty different. And I think, you know, someone like Marty Erickson, like the first thing for me as a student, the thing that I learned the most from him was like, it's going to be okay. Like I I was just that kind of college student that needed somebody to tell me that, like, it's gonna be okay. You can calm down a little bit. And he was just reassuring and just always positive and always supportive voice. And he still is. Like, I still talk to him to this day, and he's always the person I call for advice. As a tuba player, he strikes me as one of these people who just has like this like lifelong curiosity and love for the tuba. These people who, like, long after he'll ever retire, which I don't think he ever will still just pick up their tuba at like 9:00 on a Saturday morning and jam because he loves it. And I totally admire that. I think that's awesome. But yeah, Marty was this very reassuring voice. I remember when I went to study with Mike Rylance, I think one of the first things he said to me, he was like, you know what, there's always room at the top. And that really embodied for me his teaching style, which is like, if you set your mind to something and you work harder than anybody else, like, just have faith that like something is going to work out. And that's really, I think, kind of sums up his career too. I mean, he worked probably harder than most people I can imagine, and it did work out for him, but he's very, 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 very technical in his teaching. And he was just like, you work hard. And that was something at that point in my career that I really needed to hear. And then I got to Professor Martin, and Professor Martin was like, hey, have you ever thought about like what you actually want to come out of that bell of that horn? And I was like, no, that's an amazing thought.
Bubbles.
Excellent.
I was like, oh, really? That affects what comes out of your horn. Go figure, And it was one of those things where I was like doing my doctoral degree. I was like, oh my God, I've been playing the tuba for like 15 years. And I literally never asked myself that question, So the timing was really good for all of them, because they were just they all had such clear perspectives on how they approached their instrument and how they approached their career. And those perspectives like worked for them, like totally. I think the three of them are huge names in our field, at least I think. And I think the commonality is they're all extremely intelligent, but in very different ways. Like, their skill sets were so different. Marty was this reassuring, like, emotionally supportive person, which I don't know that he was for everybody, but again, it's who I was as an 18-year-old. He is
for everybody.
Is he? Yeah, that's his like strength, right? Like, he can just, yeah, exactly. Like, Mike's skill is just understanding how to work and how to distill that for his students. And Professor Martin's was just like how to be a thoughtful musician. And he can distill that probably better than most other people that I know. So I think they're all super intelligent and have super different approaches, but in ways that work for them. And I think that was really interesting to me because, as a student, you're kind of like on this like one track path where you're like, there is a right and a wrong answer, in music, something is right and something is wrong, or something is good and something is bad. And the more I traverse their teaching and school and now looking back as a teacher, the more I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of different approaches and perspectives and paths that you can follow and get really good results. It's not just my way or the highway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, because you just pointed out, we got a couple of Q&As that are good. I won't talk too long about it. They're very, very different as people, different as musicians, different from completely different backgrounds in terms of how they got to where they are. And the expectation of excellence is no different. I mean, Marty, one of the most amazing things to me about Marty is his memory. Like, I don't know, did he ever do the thing where like you would play Name That Tune thing with him?
Oh yeah. He would do that all the time.
He knows more songs than anybody I've ever met in my life.
He would sit down with like the faculty jazz group, and you could call off anything, and it would be like, and
that's awesome.
And that's just like, you can tell, like, and if you know anything about Marty's background too, like, that's just in his blood.
Yeah.
Like, if you know his mother or anything like that, he grew up with that stuff, and you can't teach that, but.
Right.
Yeah, his warm up. He would always do this warm up, right? I don't know if he's ever done it around you, but like he would be like, "Oh, haven't played yet today," pull out his E flat. Okay, I think we're good. And he'd be like, "Now, can we play my Bordoni?" Okay.
Right. If I could say something broadly about them, and then we've got a couple of Q&As, where each of them have different teaching styles, each of them have different playing styles, and you said that, as you pointed out, there's not a way to teach, there's not a way to play, but I think that all of the people that I know of who I really look up to in the business on either side of those things has an opinion about how they teach or about how they play, which is something that, like, I was going to say can be defended, and that sounds antagonistic, and that's not what I mean by that. But if you just kind of recreate what everybody else has done, and you kind of teach how everybody does, and you kind of play how everybody does, there's really nothing to, and in fact, we just got a comment from Wes that says, not a question, but a compliment to Beth. In a time where many tuba sounds are homogenous and many sound similar, Beth's awesome sound stuck out at the Army Workshop a few years ago, and I still have it in my head as a great model for F-tuba sound. It was super clear and the perfect balance of upper and lower overtones. Thanks for sharing that with the world. And that's an incredible and specific compliment. But like the way that you play the tuba, to me, the way that all three of your teachers play the tuba, the way Lance plays the euphonium, to me, it begs me for an opinion about it, which is like the biggest compliment that I can give anybody. And it doesn't mean I'll like it, but I have to have an opinion about it, because you are you enough that I just organically have an opinion about whether I like it or whether I don't, or what I like or what I don't. And that's
for sure. And I think that's one of the hardest things to develop as like in like the beginning of your career, right? Because I think you inherently want to please everybody. And I did this too. And I honestly think that's partially why I was as pitifully unsuccessful in auditions and things like that as I was in the beginning, because you try to have I just tried to be everything that everybody would like, and it, first of all, it's tiring, it's super exhausting, and second of all, it's I got burnt out really quickly. And so I think one of the things I admire you guys about too is you have a very clear perspective, and I think that is something, actually you're right, a real common denominator of all three of my teachers is they have a very clear perspective. And that's not to say that they knock other people in terms of like it's my way or whatever, but they have a very clear idea of how they do what they do and what they want to do. And I think that's a super important thing for me to remember as I consider longevity in this business.
It's a marketing, like in marketing, if you're marketing to everybody, you're marketing to nobody. And so if it's just sort of meh, and it's not offensive, and it's not, but who's it for then? Like, it's like, Marty's sound is for an ear. There's an audience who just will eat up every note that he does. And there are other people who, like, I would rather hear, one of those other two guys play, or I'd rather hear Beth play, or Andrew play a funk line. Like, it's just like if it's meh. I've quoted this a bajillion times, and I apologize to do it again, but my teacher at Akron, Tucker Jolly, had this picture on his door of a hand grenade that was an ad for something, and it said, just because it's loud doesn't mean anybody wants to listen to it. It's like, what are we doing? Like, there's got to be a point. There has to be an intention behind it and an opinion. Otherwise, like, well, why not just have it be a MIDI then?
Right. But it takes courage to have an opinion.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you sound as soon as you have a version that is as clearly Beth as Beth's is, then that's when people can be like, oh, why did she phrase that way? Or like, why did she, I like this version better. Whereas if you just kind of blend in, then nobody takes the time to have any opinion. So they don't ever say, oh, I don't really like her phrasing, because they don't like it. They don't dislike it. They have no opinion. It goes in one ear, it goes out the other, no harm, no foul. But that's not a great way to live as an artist. And it's also not a good way to make a living as an artist.
No. Then you're not in anybody's mind.
Yes, exactly.
It's not like, who you need is Beth. You got to get Beth.
Right,
like there's one person that is the ideal for what you need, and that's Beth. Like, don't, like, that end of the list. Like, call her, because then it's done.
You know, I do so much adjudicating nowadays for like, Falcone and the iTex and things like that. And for me, like the one thing that sticks out, because you get to a certain level where like, okay, everybody can play the notes, right? We're not having a contest here of accuracy. And for me, what sticks out all the time is like, does this person have an interesting perspective? And that's always to me what goes to the top of the pile.
Yes.
If like, particularly if you're listening to 12 or 15 or 20 of the same recordings back to back, like you would think it would be hard actually to differentiate. And sometimes it is, but oftentimes you hear one or two where you're like, okay, they had something interesting to say. And like, for me, I'm just like, star, done. It's,
Yes.
I don't care
you're
if you
in
were
that perspective
perfectly in
where
tune or
as
whatever.
soon as you hit play, or as soon as the next person comes in, you're like, oh please, oh please, oh please.
You're rooting
Please
for it
have
to be
it.
interesting.
Please
For
be
sure.
different in an awesome way. And it doesn't even have to be I don't need to agree with your interpretation. I just need to know that you have a clear interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
Then I'm like, oh, thank goodness.
Yeah.
It's so much easier.
I also to nuance what you're saying too. Like I think you have to have a clear interpretation, but I have to be able to see where your thinking kind of was going.
Mm-hmm.
Like I call this like being intelligently unpredictable. Like I want it to sound fresh, but I also want to know that you have a sense of understanding, because sometimes, you're just like, well, that came out of left field, but maybe not in a good way, because otherwise.
But this piece on the Falcone first round does not feature spoken word. I'm not sure where this is.
See,
you're
I'm
talking about
unpredictably
broccoli.
intelligent, which is a different thing.
You're right.
I don't know. That was a very intelligent comment.
I wrote that down. You said you had a college student use their grocery list to make up words, and you said it was broccoli, peas, and carrots. What the hell college student is buying broccoli, peas, and carrots? My
to
shopping
be fair,
list
it
would
was
have been
was mine.
okay, I was like, yeah, it would have been like Tostitos and salsa and beer, and yeah, it would have not been green or orange
I
things.
promise a really, really small aside. So I teach a business and music class every fall, and I make the kids do a personal budget worksheet. And I tell them it can be today, it can be 5 years in the future, you can make up numbers, you can do whatever you want. And I switched worksheets. I shouldn't have, because this other worksheet, it had, it broke down their, like, what do you spend on your phone, your blah, 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 blah. And many of them, their beer and alcohol budget far surpassed their food budget every month.
You see, none of my students are honest enough to admit that to me.
Yeah.
Like, I would love it if someone would put like Dos Equis or something in their roshi, but no. Broccoli, peas, and carrots. Yeah. Okay.
See, it was pretty obvious, well, in graduate school as well, but it was pretty obvious in undergrad that I didn't need any coaching on relaxing or on enjoying myself. So Mr. Martin would frequently make some cracks to that effect, which that was always one of those, like, yeah, I would argue if there was a reason to. So okay, we've got a question here from Brian, but the last thing that I just want to wrap up, we were just talking, because it's so vital, if you're young, if you're old, if you're whatever, about being yourself, is that you need to be. It's very hard to make a living. We're not only talking about a living, but this also just goes for standing out as an artist and not trying to monetize it. It's very hard to try and make a living where you're a tuba soloist and someone Googles tuba soloist and then you are the first person that pops up. What you need is for people to Google Beth Wiese. And then you are, of course, the first and second and third Google search result. And so you need to be playing or teaching or whatever, cooking or, fill in the blank, in a way that people are going to like spread the word about you and about your recital and about your tone with the specificity of that beautiful compliment from Wes. Hi, Wes.
Thanks, Wes.
About your tone on the et cetera. Like, that's something that years later he just did marketing for you, like, to Lance and I and to everybody who's going to listen to this, that like you can't pay for. That's a really specific, heartfelt, like, that's a very generous compliment that he delivered. And so you got to and Beth is so good at the tuba. She could do a very good impersonation of me playing the tuba. But why would you hire her? No, but why would you hire her to do an impersonation of me when you could? I wish this is me arguing on the merits of that comment. No, I'm going to skip that. But the point is that, like, why would you do that when you could hire me? And it's the same thing. And it's the same thing with Beth. It's the same thing with Rex. It's the same thing with Marty. It's the same thing with Carol. It's the same thing with all of those people. And so that's the thing. It's just you got to sound like you. So, All right, end of sermon. Brian would like to know, do you think it can be too early to do master classes or get lessons with different instructors?
No, I do not. Because the thing is, and as someone who has both played in a ton of master classes and performed in master classes and taught master classes now, we're all learning. It's a learning process. And the more you can be comfortable with yourself as a work in progress, I think the better off you're going to be. Honestly, I think a barrier for success is a lot of us, sorry, my computer's going crazy. I think a barrier for success for a lot of us is wanting to wait until we have the perfect finished product to put it out there, right?
Yep.
And I'm still not at that point. I still listen to my recordings and I'm like, oh man. But so I think the more we can learn, and for me, master classes taught me a lot about humility. They taught me to learn and accept different perspectives, some of which I agreed with and some of which I didn't. And they were really, really formative in helping me determine like you were talking about, Andrew, in terms of my voice. And it wasn't always for me. You would never guess this now, but I'm a very shy person. So putting myself out there, particularly when I went to the New World Symphony, we had guest artists come in every week and you could sign up for lessons, no matter what your instrument was. You could sign up for a lesson with whomever was teaching that week. And so I made it my goal for the 2 years I was there. Every person that came in that did lessons with anyone who would be listening to me play, I was like, I'll play for you. And flute players, violinists, horn players, I don't care, trombone players. I think there was one tuba player in 2 years, to be honest. But it was such a learning experience. It was such a humbling experience because not all of them were positive. Like I've had plenty of not positive experiences as well. But it was such a great learning experience to go in front of someone and say, here's what I have to offer. Tell me what you think and what you think I can improve. And I think that's a really valuable lesson. In terms of taking lessons with people, I think it's the same thing. It's really trying to look at this as here's what I have to offer. What do you think? And what kind of feedback? Because another set of ears never hurts anything. So I don't think there's ever any harm in it.
You intimated this, or you directly said it. Sometimes you heard things from these people who were expert at whatever they played that didn't happen to be the tuba.
Yep.
And it stung a little bit. So we've all been in that position where there's like that kind of concussion shock that hits you. And how do you turn that into positive action?
It's hard. I got to be honest. It took me many years, and I'm still working on it, to separate me as a musician and the product of what I put out versus me as a person. Like so oftentimes, if someone would say something to me about something either that I could do better or that they didn't like, some people were pretty blunt, it would be so hard to separate that from personal criticism. And I think that's something that really can slow down our growth. Because we're all sensitive people. Like we're super fragile. Let's be honest. Our ego is valuable. So I think I totally forgot the question.
Well, I mean, you're doing it. Like, so,
I know.
There's like that
I'm
emotional, you get hit by that's a painful thing to hear, but then you have to turn it into,
exactly.
You have to make lemonade out of it.
Exactly. So usually when that would happen, like, let's say, hypothetically, I played for a composer who really hated the way I played their piece. Definitely never happened, right?
Hindemith? Was it Hindemith?
Vaughan Williams.
Actually, I'm 74 years old, everybody. No, like 112 if it's Hindemith. Yeah, so let's say hypothetically, right? I played for somebody and they were just all flat out negative, right? The first thing I would do nowadays with my intelligence, and a few years of, seeing a good psychologist and that sort, the first thing I would do is honestly, I would just let it sit. Like, it's like, okay, you know what? Fine. You said you don't like what I do. okay. I think the last thing that we all want to do is try to be like, well, that person doesn't know what they're talking about, because that's not a perspective that's helpful in any ways.
Right.
It's only going to hurt you. It's not going to hurt that person.
Right.
They're fine.
I don't care if she likes me. Yeah,
exactly.
No one's ever said that about someone that they didn't want to like them.
Exactly. So the first thing is, I allow myself time to be like, okay, you know what? That happened, right? And then usually when I cool off, then I go back and I say, okay, what did that person say? And is there any truth to what they're saying? Then I just wait until I have a rational mind. I do this when I write emails too, by the way. If you ever get like an email from somebody where you're like anytime I have that feeling, I'm like, I wait 24 hours.
Yes.
I just wait. And it's the same thing when I get negative criticism. It's like, okay, I'm going to wait. I'm going to let the initial layer cool off, the layer of hurt. And then I'm going to look at it and say like, okay, is what they said valid? And if so, they had a point and I respect that. And if not, well, they still have a perspective. But that's my general strategy. But honestly, I was really hurt. I was really hurt for a while. It's hard.
Of course it's hard. Yeah.
Yeah, no one wants to hear, especially someone that has put in as much time and effort and continues to put in as much time and effort at getting great at the tuba and then coming up with opinions and then having the courage to share those opinions and then to feel like you're getting cut off at the knees. Like that's like, there's no normal, I don't care if you're Yo-Yo Ma and you're beloved, right? I mean, there's probably gonna be a statue of that guy somewhere, like when it's all said and done. And there's no way that Yo-Yo Ma wants a composer to be like, this, I would not have written this piece if I thought it was going to go like this. I don't care how famous you are. He'd have to go and think about that. So, yeah. And what Beth just described is emotional intelligence, which is the capacity to be aware of, one's emotions and to control one's emotions. And I love that she even just shared some strategies too, which is like wait 24 hours to respond to the email, to not just discount the person's opinion right away. And also, I'd like to point out that you did not just say the person always has a point and it's always criticism that's worth hearing and internalizing, because they don't. But it's like, but I feel better about drawing that conclusion if I take the time to like get some, to uncharge. That's not a word. It is now.
No. If you can look at it with a clear perspective, and it's like this is so much of what I try to do for myself too as a human being too. Which if I can look as objectively as I possibly can at a situation and develop an opinion, then I feel like it's a pretty justified action, justified behavior. But usually it takes a while. It's not in the heat of battle when someone tells you that your performance
your face is stupid. All of you is stupid.
Yeah, we all cry, don't we? We all have a good cry, and then
yeah, you can always say, well, yeah, I can always change how I play your piece, but you're going to be stuck with that face forever. So yeah,
John Williams.
Brian, I will reiterate what Beth just said. I don't think it's ever too early for master classes, for lessons. I had the ability through privilege to be able to take a lesson with like every tuba player that came through Tanglewood with a visiting orchestra. I had a lesson with David Kirk. I had a lesson with Warren Deck. I had just said yes to, and both of those were good lessons, but like there were some that were amazing and then others that were like, okay, yeah, I wouldn't go and study for 4 years with that person. And some were big names, but that's okay, because they weren't all like, oh, I hope he comes to my school either, so it's just, yes, I think that you can't be too early on that.
I think you also need to, the hand in hand with that is, you get a master class with someone. You've been studying with, so you're one of Beth's students, and Marty shows up to give a master class. Marty's leaving tomorrow. So take what Marty's saying and use what's useful of it, and then you have to put it through the filter of remembering that Beth has a long-term strategy for you. Like if she's your primary teacher, then she's got a much different perspective on everything. And Marty might show up and throw, we've all been in that kind of, hey, you know what? Try this. How about more air? Exaggerate that dynamics. How about
one more time with feeling?
Yeah. So remember that you don't have to, you should get the opinion, and then you need to put it through the computer of, well, Beth is my primary teacher, and how does this align with or differ from? And if it differs from, then you say, hey, Professor Wiese, how do I, they said this, what do I do with that? Because
I love those questions.
You can sort of figure that out.
Fun.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and particularly like when you're a student, like I really felt like for the longest time when I was a student, like my job was to consume. Like I was a vessel to consume as much as I could. And honestly, it didn't really feel like until I was at like maybe the end of my doctoral degree where I was like, okay, now I feel like I have acquired enough knowledge to start to like create, it was like I've been consuming. I feel like a Cookie Monster or something. And then I finally got to a point where I was like, okay, I feel like maybe I know a fraction of enough to maybe do something. And so for me, I think that mentality of just trying to absorb as much as I can, it really helped the learning process because I wasn't as ego hurt always.
We've only got about 5 minutes left here. Here's another question. This is from anonymous attendee. I'm not sure if this is the same anonymous attendee who asked Pat Sheridan a question. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. This is a very good question that I can't wait to hear Beth's answer. You all have spoken a lot about finding your voice in this session. What would you recommend someone do as first steps to, quote, finding your voice on the tuba?
Yeah, consume. And I think one of the things that I see, I'll start with the positive aspect first. I think one of the best things that I did unintentionally when I was a kid was just listen to everything I possibly could and consume very indiscriminately. It was as much as I could. And nowadays too, I feel like it's almost, the quantity of material is almost overwhelming. I lived in the era of, I grew up in the era of CDs, so it was a little bit more marginalized, a little bit. But I really listened to everything and I tried to just absorb as much as I could. And I listened as carefully as I could too. I remember when I was like middle school or something, I would listen with headphones and I would like mark in everywhere where they would breathe and like how they would shape notes. I would like draw little shapes on my music and stuff like that.
Wow.
And I had no idea what the hell I was doing, like whatever. But the more I consumed, the more I found my own voice, as weird as that seems, I think a lot of times we're so obsessed with like I have to find my own voice that we stop consuming, which we're so much worried about the output, that we're not as concerned as we could be about the input. And I think a good output comes when you have a huge bank of creativity and curiosity, and you put those two things together and you get a really interesting product. But I'll reiterate, I think it took me a long time to do, and I'll give Professor Martin a lot of credit too for the work that he did with me in terms of like developing that sound, particularly. That was my doctoral. That was after 10, 12 years of college at that point. It took a long time.
So I will, if I can interject, she didn't say, she's not saying it took a long time for you to start that. It just, it sounds to me like if I don't let me put words in your mouth. Yeah, it took a long time for it to really get traction, for you to really become you as an artist. And there's so many things that played into that too. I was learning. I was an insecure, dumb college student, always worried about whatever everyone else was thinking. Again, I was super concerned more with what people were upset, how people were assessing the outcome, right? And so a lot of that work, it's a cumulative process. Like I said, I would say it started, when I was, really young. And I think you're the same way, Andrew, and same with you, Lance. Like all these things that you do throughout your career add up to this cumulative artistry that you all have.
Oh, and it never ends. I mean, Rex, I love my relationship with Rex now. We've never been like super close, just like our lives took different trajectories, and we're buddies to to the degree that we can be, and the way we interact is like if there's an awesome thing that Bob Dylan or Tom Waits did, then we share that with each other. Like if I found it first, I send it to him. Otherwise, it comes to me. And it's like, oh, this is like, because we're just on the lookout for the next awesome thing. And I know that he would dig this. And I knew that Andrew would dig, it's like, that's how, because I just know he's a listener. He's a thinker. He's going to, going in another ingredient into the soup.
And Lance, you bring up a really good point too, which is that like, and Andrew, I remember when you were talking to my students too, someone asked you, I think, what you listen to, right? And I'm not sure you actually said a tuba player in that whole milieu.
Probably didn't. Yeah, I know. Not that I don't listen to tuba, but it's not top of mind.
That's the same thing with like Rex too. Like Tom Waits, Bob Dylan, like that's his stuff. Like I could name you 10 artists that I've heard like Professor Martin go on and on and on about, and probably 8 of them are not classical musicians, and not a single one of them at all are tuba players. They're just musicians, and so it's just this whole cadre of things to listen to that make you a great musician.
Every single person who is generous enough to join us for this workshop, Pat, Beth, Justin, Aubrey, Chris, every one of them, I'm lucky enough to know all of them, and they're all curious, and they didn't just get curious. It's like not like Aubrey Ford was like not curious, and then he was validated by winning the Baltimore Symphony audition and then getting tenure, and then like he was like, I'm going to start poking around, figuring out like maybe how I can improve my playing and my teeth. It's like it's in that guy's DNA. And it's the same with Chris. It's the same with every single one of those people that I mentioned. And that's something that some people are born with. I've seen people develop it as well. And so I think that the key to all of this is to get curious. And if you have curiosity and you have courage, then like you're going to go far no matter what you do, whether you're teaching, whether you're playing, whether you're composing music, whether you're an electrical engineer. I mean, like curiosity and then the courage to like put it out there and to have people say, I don't like Beth's version of that, and for that to not feel good, but also not to derail you for a month, which is easier said than done. But yeah, this has been an awesome conversation. I knew it would be, but this was really good. Sorry if we didn't have time to get to your questions. This was wonderful. See, Lance was skeptical, and I was like, no, I'm telling you, Beth.
Oh, really?
Well, it's about Andrew. It had nothing to do with you.
Yeah, okay.
He just didn't want to be.
I don't know you. How would I know? Him, I know.
I did.
You guys can talk about anything for an hour. Come on. We barely even talked about the tuba. You see?
Yeah. Well,
Is this supposed to be about the tuba?
Shoot.
Well, answer Eli's question real quick.
Got a few vowels. Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
What piece would you assign to every student?
I don't know. That's a good question. Who wrote that?
Would you? Is there a piece like that?
I gotta be honest.
And if not, why?
know.
I think is the crux.
Okay. Here was an interesting project. I'm gonna deflect a little bit just to take the pressure off of me here. When I was in grad school at Yale, we had this class called Hearing, right? Which is like this very esoteric name and a wonderful Ivy League school name. It was called Hearing. And one of our first assignments was to learn the prelude from Bach's first cello suite on our instrument.
There you go.
And perform it from memory. I think it was from memory. I think so. In front of our class, right? And I'll tell you, the people that go to Yale, like they are smart. They know what they're doing. They know how to play their instrument real good. And it was fascinating because it was, there may be like 15 of us in that class. I don't think we actually had any cellists either, to be fair. And like the perspective was fascinating. And it's something that I still go back to today. Like I went back to that it's been a while. That was a really interesting, I explored so many concepts about meter and about harmony and about how we play our instrument, flexibility, holy Lord. All sorts of things that were really interesting. Would I assign that to every one of my students? Oh, Lord, no. Definitely not. Do I think everyone can get something from playing some aspect of Bach? Yeah, I love Bach. I wrote a whole dissertation on the dude. But I think I would have to say, I don't know if there's one piece that I would assign, because that would assume that I see all my students on a plane, and I don't know that I do.
That's exact. I mean, I think that's the exact right answer. Like, the answer is no in most cases, because it's the kid who walks through the door has a specific set of needs, a specific set of interests, a specific set of things that come easy or difficult, and so there can't be.
Yeah, I did an entire studio recital one semester, where I made everybody pick a vocal leader and memorize it. But I gave them certain parameters, and I let them pick one. And that was fascinating. I have to say that was a really good experience. But again, it wasn't one piece, but it was a really good genre, and it was meant to sort of foster that connection between singing in your head and playing your instrument with ease. And so that would be the closest I could come.
Perfect. No, I think that's exactly right. I think that's right.
All right, Beth, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you to everybody who has joined us for this session. The next one is in 26 minutes with Justin Benavides of Florida State University.
Wow.
That guy's traveling all over the place, playing recitals.
Seriously.
You're just playing with the Utah Symphony. He's like, we're lucky to catch him for an hour at home. But Beth, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much. And,
absolutely. Thank you all. That's been fantastic.
We will see you all in a few minutes.
You've been listening to The Brass Junkies on the Pedal Note Media Podcast Network. If you would like to hear the bonus episode featuring today's guest, please visit patreon.com/thebrassjunkies to learn how you can support the show and instantly access all bonus materials, as well as gain access to a special patron-only Facebook group. The Brass Junkies is produced by the amazing, wonderful, and truly inspirational Will Houchin. The theme music was composed by Fernando Dados and performed by Andrew Hitz and Lance LaDuke. We are at Pray for Jens on Twitter and Instagram, and have a Facebook page at facebook.com/prayforjens. You can find out more about the Brass Junkies and all the other Pedal Note Media podcasts at pedalnotemedia.com. This has been a presentation of the Pedal Note Media Podcast Network.